Hi there, I'm Tick, and tonight we will listen. Why it sucked to be a spy in World War II. People imagine spies as brave, slick heroes from stories. But reality was slow, cold, and silent. There were no fast cars, no shiny gadgets, only long days of hiding, whispering, and pretending not to exist. Spies in WWWA, they weren't just soldiers, they were shadows, and the worst part, no one even knew their names. Let's begin. It usually started in a classroom, not a battlefield. A small, cold room with wooden floors, a ticking clock, and a man with a soft voice saying, "Forget who you are." A spy's first lesson was always the same: disappear. A real name was the first thing to go. No ID, no birthday, not even a hometown, just a fake name written in soft pencil on the back of a fake document. And if you forgot that name, even for a moment, you were finished. The training, it wasn't glamorous. It was waking up before the sun in a damp bunk, rolling up a tiny bedroll in silence, eating stale toast in 5 minutes or less. A room full of others, who also said nothing. You'd spend hours learning how to breathe quietly, how to step without sound, how to write backwards in mirror text. One man, he got caught just for the way he tied his shoelaces. Then came the code practice, not the fun kind. It was all repetition, dots and dashes until they echoed in your skull even while sleeping. Da-da-da-da. They'd give you a fake name, a fake job, a fake background, and make you hold that identity even when you were half awake, covered in mud, shivering under a tree, because that's when they'd test you, wake you at 3 a.m., and say, "Who are you?" If you hesitated, even once, you'd be out. Now, the clothes. You didn't get a uniform, you got someone's old jacket and trousers that didn't fit, because blending in meant looking like you'd lived in that town for 30 years. Your shoes had to be worn, but not too worn. You'd walk in them for hours in mud, just to break them in right. Some trainees even slept in hay barns for weeks before a mission, just to pick up the right smell. And food. You learned to love dry crackers and beans from tins. You couldn't carry much, just what fit in a small coat pocket. Sometimes, just some breadcrumbs wrapped in wax paper. No labels, nothing traceable. You'd learn to eat slowly, one biscuit over 3 hours. Anything more, and someone might notice your energy. Then came the drop, the mission day. The officer would give you a small envelope sealed, no name, and say, "Don't open unless you reach the other side." You'd board a train at night, dressed like a worker or a merchant. Inside, silence. 1,000 faces that looked too closely. The train would stop. You'd wait, then move, always with your eyes down. If you were lucky, you'd get off at a countryside station. If not, it was a border town, with guards, with dogs, with questions. Your suitcase, it couldn't be too new, not too worn. Inside, maybe a shirt, maybe a comb, maybe a slip of paper sewn into the lining, invisible to anyone who didn't know where to feel. And the guards, they'd tap their fingers on your case, look into your eyes, ask your name 3 times in 3 different accents, and you had to smile, softly, just like someone who had nothing to hide. That's when the silence began. Once inside the country, you had no one, no friends, no phone, no place to sleep, unless you'd memorized the address. Maybe an attic, maybe under a church. You couldn't knock. You'd just wait outside, counting your breaths, 120 of them, slow and soft. Then, the door might open, or it might not. You'd sleep in corners, on sacks, under staircases. The cold was constant. Sometimes your teeth would chatter so hard, you'd bite your own tongue. You had to learn to press your jaw shut while sleeping. That took weeks. And when you finally met your contact, you couldn't smile too much, couldn't talk freely. The conversation would be in code, buried inside another conversation. "How's the weather in Marseille?" Might mean the target moves tomorrow. You couldn't ask questions. You just nodded, and then walked away. Every single face on the street became a puzzle. Too friendly, dangerous, too quiet, suspicious. You'd memorize license plates, window curtains, shoe style. The man who read the newspaper in the cafe every morning, was he always there before you arrived, or did he wait for you? The worst feeling wasn't fear, it was doubt. The doubt that maybe you'd already been discovered. Maybe your accent slipped. Maybe you looked left when you should have looked down. Maybe someone already followed you home, and tomorrow, you'd disappear. But you couldn't run. That would confirm everything. So you walked, slowly, quietly, back to your tiny attic, where you sat for hours, sometimes days, staring at the ceiling, listening for footsteps, writing nothing, saying nothing. waiting for the next moment you had to move, or vanish. The air in the attic was heavy. Not from dust or smoke, but from waiting. Long, still waiting. The kind where your ears become sharper, your hands colder, your breath slower. It was the kind of place where time didn't move. He sat with his knees to his chest, his back against a wooden beam. A gray wool blanket covered his legs. There was a small candle, almost done, flickering near his foot. The flame leaned left and right with each draft that came through the cracks in the roof. A mouse scratched somewhere behind the wall. A pipe dripped. The world outside was sleeping, but he couldn't. His name wasn't his real name. Not here. Here he was called Jacob, a quiet man who worked with shoes and sold them door to door. No one remembered shoe sellers. That was the plan. That was what the trainer said. Be boring. Be forgettable. Be small. On the floor was a box. Inside the box was a shirt, 2 old books and a loaf of bread that had gone hard around the edges. Hidden between the pages of the book was a paper folded 3 times. If unfolded, it would show the number 44 written in dark blue ink. That number was a code. It meant a train was leaving in 2 nights. It meant someone needed to be there. It meant his legs had to move again. But tonight he could not move. The boards of the attic floor creaked even if he breathed too deep, so he breathed small breath in through his nose and out through his lips. He listened to the street outside. A cart rolled by. A dog barked. Then it is quiet again. Downstairs, the family who let him stay for 1 night was also quiet. They were not supposed to talk to him. Not too much. Just hand gestures and food. A bowl of soup left on the stairs. A smile at the door. Nothing more. He looked at his hands. They were cracked. The skin on his fingers had turned red and dry. Too many cold nights. Too many matches struck in the wind. His nails were chipped. Underneath one, a bit of dry blood still clung to the edge. From what? He couldn't remember. Maybe from climbing a fence last week. Maybe from opening a broken lock. Beside him was a tiny cloth bag. In it, a small mirror, a folded map, a pencil no bigger than his finger, and a tiny glass bottle filled with powder. The powder could burn paper fast. If someone found him, he could drop the bottle onto any paper, and the fire would take the secrets away. He hadn't used it yet. He closed his eyes for a moment, but sleep did not come. Instead, he saw the train station from 2 days ago. The old man with the coat that looked too clean. The boy who stared too long. The way the conductor asked for tickets twice. The small voice inside him said, "You were noted." And once the voice starts, it doesn't stop. That voice had lived in his mind since training. It followed him through cities and forests. It whispered when he reached for a door handle. It screamed when someone asked, "Where are you from?" He stood up slowly, 1 foot after the other. He stretched his back. The wood creaked. He stopped, waited. No one came. He looked out the tiny attic window. Outside, the street lamp was flickering. A man walked past with a sack on his shoulder. Far away, a clock tower rang once. Just one. That meant it was 1 in the morning. Time to move. He pulled on his coat. Dark gray. A little too big. Perfect. He tied a scarf around his neck, then reached under the blanket and grabbed the small cloth bag and the old book with the paper hidden inside. He held them to his chest for a second, felt their weight. Not heavy, but they felt heavy. He tiptoed to the small wooden ladder. 1 step, 2. His foot slipped. But he caught himself. He froze, listened. The house was still quiet. The candle had gone out. He moved again, down the ladder, past a shelf filled with dusty boxes. He reached the hallway. A soft light glowed from the kitchen. The soup bowl was gone. In its place was a cup of tea, warm, steam rising. He hadn't asked for it. That was dangerous, but it was also kind. He walked past it, not touching it, just looking once and giving a nod to the empty kitchen. Maybe the old woman's, maybe she didn't. At the door, he paused. The lock clicked softly. He stepped outside. The night air was sharp, like tiny needles poking his cheeks. He pulled the scarf higher. The city was still. A few cars moved far away. Somewhere a baby cried. His boots touched the cobblestone street. 1 step, another. His shadow followed. He walked like he had a purpose. Not too fast, not too slow. Just like someone who lived nearby. His hands in his pockets. 1 hand holding the cloth bag, the other holding the book. He turned left, then right, past a bakery. The smell of stale flour and cold dough reached him. then past a locked barber shop. In the window was a cracked mirror. He looked at his reflection. Just a man, tired eyes, a rough scarf, nothing more. At the next corner he stopped, bent down, pretended to tie his boot. From his sleeve, a tiny paper fell into the drain. It looked like trash. It wasn't. It was the location of a safe house. Only one person would check that drain in the morning. He stood again, and kept walking. 3 blocks later, he saw a cafe, dark inside, but someone had left a candle on the windowsill. That was the sign. Not a flame, just a candle, burnt once, cold now. He turned around, walked away. That cafe was no longer safe. Instead, he took the long path, down a side street, past a broken gate, into a small alley, where trash bins stood like guards. Behind the third bin was a door, blue paint, rusted handle. He knocked 3 times, waited. 2 knocks came back. That was the code. He opened the door. Inside was a narrow room. A man sat on a stool with a newspaper on his lap. He didn't look up, just said, "Do you know the weather in Paris?" Jacob replied, "It's dry, but the clouds are moving east." That was enough. The man stood, opened a box. Inside were 2 train tickets, a pair of gloves, and a small key. He didn't ask questions. Neither did Jacob. Jacob took the items, nodded, sat for a moment on the wooden stool, let the heat from the small stove touch his knees. There was no talking, just the crackling sound of firewood, and the tiny hum of a radio playing classical music under a blanket. 10 minutes passed. Then the man said, "Your train is at 5, don't take the main road." Jacob stood, walked to the door, opened it, closed it. Outside again, darker now. Clouds had moved in, a mist was falling, soft, like wet dust in the air. The sound of his steps changed, softer, slower. He walked toward the train station, not the big one, a small one, where no one waited, just old benches, a rusty roof, and a single lamp hanging from a wire. He reached it by 4:30. The train didn't arrive until 5:10. In that time, he sat, still. The cold reached through his coat. His fingers curled in his gloves, his eyes half shut. He didn't sleep, he only sat. The train came, 1 carriage, 2 windows lit. He stood, walked, stepped inside. A young woman sat near the back, reading a paper. She looked up once, smiled softly, then looked down again. He sat 2 seats behind her, took out his book, opened page 33, but he didn't read. He only listened. The train moved, and he moved with it. The train moved slowly through the dark countryside. Its wheels made a soft, steady sound, clack, 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 that filled the quiet air inside the carriage. It was still early. The sky outside the windows was dark blue, almost black, with no sign of the sun yet. Fog rested low on the ground like a soft gray blanket. Fields passed by, empty, still, cold. Inside the carriage, the lights were dim and yellow. They flickered every few minutes. The wooden seats creaked gently each time the train bumped or turned. The air smelled like old wood and iron. It was not a bad smell, just old, like something that had waited a long time. Jacob sat with his back straight, and his hands folded over the small book in his lap. He didn't open the book. He didn't look around too much, just enough to see, not enough to stare. He could hear someone coughing at the far end of the carriage. A dry cough. Then silence again. The woman with the newspaper had folded it now. She leaned her head against the window and closed her eyes. Her hands rested gently on her coat, and her breathing was slow. Jacob looked out the window. The glass was cold. He leaned close, and his breath made a small cloud that faded quickly. He watched it disappear. Then another, then another. The fog outside made the trees look like shadows, thin, tall, and quiet. Every so often, a small village would pass. A few lights in the windows, a barn, a road that disappeared into the hills. No people, no movement, just quiet. He reached into his coat pocket and felt the small key. It was smooth and cold, just a simple piece of metal. But it meant something. It opened something. He didn't know what yet. He just had to carry it. That was enough. He also had the paper with the number 4. It was still inside the book. Page 72. He had checked it 3 times during the wait. Each time the number looked the same. Faded blue ink, slanted handwriting. Nothing more. But it meant a place, or a time, or a name. He didn't need to know which. He just needed to remember it. A train worker walked past, slow steps, heavy boots. He didn't look at Jacob, just checked the small lamp above the door, tapped a metal switch, then walked away. His coat made a soft swishing sound with each step. Jacob looked down again. The glove on his left hand had a small tear near the thumb. He had stitched it once before, but it had opened again. The skin underneath was dry and red. He rubbed it slowly, then stopped. Too much movement was never good. The train curved. The lights flickered again. He remembered something from his training. One of the instructors, an old man with gray hair and a sharp voice, had said, "Most missions fail not because of bullets, but because of impatience." At the time Jacob hadn't understood, but now he did. A small noise came from under the seat. He leaned down slowly. There was a piece of paper folded near his foot. Not his. It had fallen from the seat ahead. He picked it up gently. It was a train schedule. Nothing strange. No markings. Just stops and times. He folded it again and placed it on the edge of the window ledge. Better not to carry what isn't yours. Outside the fog had thickened. The trees were gone now. Just gray. The world looked like it had disappeared. He closed his eyes not to sleep, but to rest them. His ears stayed awake. Every sound mattered. The slow hum of the train, the soft breathing of the woman, the faint ticking of the small metal fan above the door. Then a new sound. The brakes. They whined softly at first, like a bird's cry far away. Then they grew louder. The train was slowing down. Jacob opened his eyes. The train worker came back. He nodded once at the passengers. No words. Then turned the small brass handle near the door. The outer door creaked open, and a cold wind swept through the carriage. It smelled of wet leaves and soil. The train stopped. No station, just a small platform with one bench, and a lamp hanging from a pole. The lamp swung gently in the wind. There was a sign, but most of the letters had faded. Only Dorf could be read. The woman with the newspaper stood, and walked out first. She didn't look back. She didn't hurt. She walked like she had done this many times. Jacob stood next. He stepped down onto the platform. The ground was wet. His boots made a soft squishing sound on the wood. The air was colder here, a little sharper. He pulled his scarf tighter. The train waited for 10 seconds. Then the doors closed, and it moved again. The wheels started slowly, then faster. Then it disappeared into the fog. Now it was just him, the woman, and the small platform. But the woman was already gone. He didn't follow her. He walked toward the edge of the platform. A narrow dirt path led into the trees. No signs, no lights, just the path. He checked his pocket. The map was still there. He unfolded it slowly. It was small, maybe the size of a postcard. Only 5 roads marked. One of them led to a circle. That circle was drawn in red ink. Next to it, the number 44. He folded it again. He walked. The trees were tall and still. No birds, no wind, only the soft sound of his boots on the wet leaves. He stepped carefully, not fast, not slow, just steady. The path curved after 10 minutes, then split, left or right. He looked at the ground. To the left there were footprints, small, maybe a woman's. They looked fresh. To the right, no prints. He turned right. The trees got thicker. The sky above was just a strip of dark gray. Still no sun. He passed an old sign nailed to a tree. The letters were too faded to read. Moss had grown over half of it. Then after 30 more steps, he saw it. A barn. Old, wide and quiet. One side of the roof had collapsed. The doors were closed. One window had no glass, just wooden slats. He walked to the door, knocked once, then twice, then once more. Silence. Then the door creaked open. Inside was dark. A small oil lamp sat on a crate. A boy no older than 16 held it. He looked at Jacob, then stepped back. Jacob entered. The floor creaked under his boots. Straw covered the ground. A few tools leaned against the wall. A broken chair lay in the corner. The boy pointed to the crate. Jacob sat. The boy said nothing. He walked to a shelf and picked up a small tin box. He opened it. Inside was bread, cheese, and an apple. He placed it on the crate, then left the room. Jacob took a bite of the bread. It was hard, but not bad. The cheese was sharp. The apple had a bruise. He ate slowly. After eating, he opened his book. Page 72. The paper was still there. He took it out and placed it on the crate. The boy returned. He looked at the paper, then not. From his coat, he pulled a small wooden cube. Inside it was a keyhole. He placed it next to the paper. Jacob took out the key. He turned it slowly in the cube. It clicked. The boy opened the cube. Inside a folded cloth, a silver ring, and a small card with an address. The boy handed him the card. Then he left again. Jacob stayed in the barn. The oil lamp flickered. He read the card. Then he tucked it into his coat. He lay back on the straw, closed his eyes. The wind outside made the wooden walls creak gently. He didn't sleep, but he rested. Wait again. The barn smelled of old straw, damp wood, and something like burnt oil. The scent wasn't strong, but it sat in the air like a soft coat. Jacob lay on his back on a pile of loose hay, staring up at the ceiling. The wooden boards above him were uneven and full of small holes. Through them, he could see patches of the sky, a dull gray blue that never changed much. The straw crackled under his weight every time he shifted. It wasn't soft, but it was better than stone. His coat was still on, buttoned up to his neck. His scarf was folded under his head like a pillow. His hands were inside his sleeves, resting over his stomach. The lamp beside him gave off a soft orange light. Its small flame made the shadows on the walls sway slowly, like gentle waves. He watched them move back and forth as the wind outside brushed against the walls of the barn. Somewhere far off, a dog barked. Once then silence. The rooster crowed even though it was still dark. Jacob didn't move. A small wooden ladder led up to a loft above. The boy who had brought him the food was up there now, sleeping on an old mattress. Jacob could hear his slow breathing, calm and steady. He closed his eyes for a moment, not to sleep, but to rest the bullets behind them. His ears stayed open. Outside, the trees rustled. A branch tapped against the barn's side in slow, hollow thumps. 1, 2. Pause. 3. Then nothing. The cold was still in the air, but inside the barn the oil lamp gave just enough warmth to take the bite away. His boots were still on. The mud had dried on the edges. He could feel the stiffness at the toes. He'd walked many hours in them, and they no longer felt like shoes, just weight. He sat up slowly. The hay stuck to his coat. He brushed it off softly, then reached into his inner pocket and pulled out the small card the boy had given him. He unfolded it. The card was thick, cream-colored. The address was written in dark ink, in careful handwriting. Below it 2 simple words, Monday, dusk. He looked at the window. It was Sunday now. That meant he had one day to reach the address. Time was there, but not much. He folded the card and put it back in his pocket, then stood. His legs ached slightly. He stretched slow and silent. His fingers were stiff. He rubbed them together, feeling the dry skin catch. He stepped toward the barn door, opened it slowly. The hinges creaked just a little. Outside the air was fresh and cold. The sky was lighter now, soft gray with hints of pale yellow. Morning was coming. He walked to a small stream behind the barn. The water moved gently over smooth stones. He cupped his hands, dipped them in, and splashed his face. The water was icy. It stung a little, but it woke him up. He looked into the water. His face stared back, tired eyes, pale skin, a shadow of a beard starting to grow. He had not looked in a mirror for many days. He barely recognized his own face, but that was normal. He took out a handkerchief and dried his face, then drank a few mouthfuls of water, cupping it carefully. The taste was clean, earthy, not like city water. Back in the barn, he packed his small things, the book, the map, the key, and the card, all into the cloth bag. He wrapped some bread in a piece of paper and placed it beside the map. The boy came down from the loft, rubbing his eyes. Jacob nodded once. The boy nodded back. No words. He reached into his coat and took out a coin. He placed it on the crate where the lamp still burned. The boy looked at it, said nothing, then turned and walked back to the loft. Jacob stepped out into the morning. The path was muddy now. His boots sank a little with each step. He followed it to the main road. The map showed a small town not far. That was his goal. As he walked, the sounds of morning grew around him. Birds chirped in short bursts. A rooster crowed again, far away. A bell rang once, maybe from a church. The road was quiet, dirt and small stones. He passed a broken fence and a cart missing its wheels. A scarecrow stood in a field, its arms outstretched. Its shirt flapped gently in the breeze. A small house appeared at the bend in the road. Smoke rose from its chimney. He could smell bread baking. The scent drifted toward him like a soft hand. He didn't stop. 2 hours passed. Then 3. He reached the edge of a village. A wooden sign stood at the entrance. The letters were carved deep, but worn by rain and sun. Lacan. A small town. He adjusted his coat and scarf, made sure his bag was closed, then walked in like he belonged. The village had one main street, cobblestone, shops with wooden signs, a bakery, a tailor, a small shop that sold tools and candles. People were just starting to open their doors. A man swept his doorstep with a straw broom. A woman watered plants in a wooden box. Jacob kept his eyes soft, his face calm. He nodded at a man who passed him. The man nodded back. He saw a bench near the bakery. He sat, took out the bread and ate slowly. One bite. Chew, wait. Then another. The smell of warm bread from the bakery mixed with the cold air. People lined up for rolls and buns. A child dropped a coin. It rolled to Jacob's boot. He picked it up and handed it back with a small smile. The child smiled too, then ran off. He watched the people. No soldiers, no guards, but he knew not to relax. He finished the bread and took out the card again. The address was nearby. A street 2 blocks over. He waited another hour, then stood, walked calmly. The street was narrow. Houses stood close together, each with a small gate and a flower box. He found a blue door, white curtains in the window. He did not go in. Instead, he walked past, counted the steps, noted the buildings across the street. One had a red roof. Another had a broken shutter. He turned the corner, found an alley, waited. Time passed. A man stepped out of number. He wore a gray coat and a black hat. He locked the door, walked away. Jacob stepped out, walked back to the door, looked once more, then kept walking. He would return at dusk, as the card said. He found a quiet place behind a church, sat on a bench near the trees. Children played nearby. A dog barked once. A bell rang again. He watched the sky change, light gray, then soft blue, then gold dusk. Was near. He stood, walked to the address. This time he knocked. Once, then twice, then a pause. The door opened a little. An old man looked out. Thin, sharp eyes. Jacob held up the card. The man nodded, opened the door fully. Jacob stepped inside. The house smelled like old paper and dry flowers. A lamp flickered on a table. The man pointed to a chair. Jacob sat. The man took the card, folded it, placed it in a book, then handed Jacob a small envelope. No words. Jacob opened it. Inside, a photo of a young man, a name, a location, and a single line. Train leaves Tuesday, midnight. Jacob nodded once, then tucked the envelope into his coat. The old man stood, walked to the door. Jacob followed. Outside, the street was quiet again. He stepped into the cold. The door closed behind him. He didn't look back. Jacob walked away from the house, slowly. The streets were dim now. Lamps on tall iron poles had started to glow. Their light was soft and yellow, and it touched the cobblestones like warm paint. A breeze passed through the street. It carried the smell of wood smoke, baking bread, and faint flowers from the window boxes. He turned the corner and walked toward the edge of the village. His steps were quiet. His coat moved gently with each step. His scarf had loosened a bit, and he pulled it back up. The night was settling in. At the far end of the village was a small inn. Its sign creaked as it swung in the wind. The letters on it read, Rose Hill. Faint music came from inside. Soft piano, slow and low, through the window. Jacob saw a few people eating soup, drinking from tin cups. One man played cards with another. They were quiet, tired. He didn't go in. Instead, he passed the inn and walked up a small hill that looked over the town. At the top was a bench made of stone. Moss had grown over part of it. He sat there. The view was wide. He He could see rooftops and lanterns, smoke rising from chimneys, small figures moving like shadows in the streets. He took out the envelope, opened it again. The photo was old, a little bent at the corners. The young man in it had round glasses and dark, thick hair. His smile was soft. His eyes looked off to the side like he didn't know his picture was being taken. On the back, someone had written a name, Daniel, and below that, takes train Tuesday midnight. Jacob studied the face, tried to remember it. He would need to know it well, not just the shape, but the feeling, the kind of person he might be. Was he nervous, careful, brave? He tucked the photo back into the envelope and slid it inside his coat. The night grew colder. He stood and walked toward a small barn nearby. The door was open slightly. Inside there was an old wheelbarrow, some buckets and a stack of hay. No animals. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. It was dark but quiet. He sat in the corner, leaned against the wall. The wood was rough and smelled like rain and dust. He took off his gloves, rubbed his hands together, then opened the cloth bag. Inside were his things: the map, the book, the burned piece of bread he had not finished, the key. He reached for the book and flipped through the pages slowly. He wasn't reading, just moving his fingers across the paper. The paper was dry and made a soft scratching sound with each turn. It was a comforting sound. He stopped on a page with an old stain, a ring of dark color. He didn't remember what caused it. Maybe a drink, maybe a candle. He stared at it for a moment, then turned the page. He could hear something outside, a soft rustling, wind through the trees, a small bird calling once, then stopping. He leaned back and closed his eyes. Inside the barn, the darkness was thick, but not scary. It wrapped around him like a thick blanket. The silence helped him think. He thought about Daniel, about the train, about Tuesday at midnight. Then he thought about his own name, his real one. It had been so long since he used it. He whispered it once under his breath, just to feel how it sounded. It felt far away, like a dream. He didn't say it again. He listened to the wind. He thought about the station, about how many trains left at midnight, about which one Daniel would be on. He imagined the station, dim lights, cold air, the smell of oil and metal, people waiting, some alone, some with bags, faces down, voices low. He pictured himself there, watching, waiting. Then he fell asleep, just for a little while. His eyes opened again when the cold touched his face. The wind had shifted. The barn door moved slightly, with a soft creak. He sat up slowly, stretched his legs. Outside the sky was darker. Clouds had covered the stars. A soft mist was falling, almost rain. Not quite. He stepped out of the barn. The mist touched his face gently. It made the air smell clean, like wet stone and leaves. He walked down the hill, back into the village. He needed to be near the station tomorrow. He needed to see it, learn its shape, its light, its sounds. He needed to know where to stand, where to wait, where not to be seen. He passed the bakery again, closed now. The smell of baked bread had faded. He passed a house with a wooden fence. A dog barked once inside, then stopped. He turned down a street with cobblestones that were slick with mist. The lanterns reflected on them like soft yellow puddles. Then he saw it, the small train station. It wasn't much, a low building, with a wide roof, 2 benches outside, a single lamp, a board with train times, written in chalk. He walked past slowly. He didn't stop, just looked. He noted the benches, the windows, the doors, a small alley behind the station where he could hide if needed. A newspaper stand beside the door, closed now, papers behind glass, headlines in big black letters. He walked further, then circled back. He found a place near a tree, a spot where he could sit and watch without being seen. He leaned against the tree and listened. He heard the whistle of a train in the distance, then the soft sound of wheels on track. A train pulled in. Only 3 people got off. No one got on. The train waited, then left. Jacob watched. He watched how the light from the lamppost hit the roof, how the shadows moved across the tracks, how the doors opened and closed. He stood there a long time, then walked away. He found a small alley nearby, sat on a crate, took out the map. He traced his finger along the road from the village to the station, then from the station to the next town, then back. He folded the map. He leaned against the wall, closed his eyes again. He could feel the ground under him, cold, solid. He could hear the village around him, still, breathing. He waited, as he always did, and the night continued on. The stone beneath Jacob was rough and cold. He shifted his weight slowly, pressing his back against the brick wall behind him. The crate under him creaked a little, but it held steady. His scarf was pulled up to his nose now. The mist in the air had become heavier. Each breath he took turned into a cloud that disappeared in front of his eyes. The alley was narrow and quiet. On one side a wall with peeling paint. On the other a line of closed wooden doors. One had a broom leaning against it. Another had a small lantern above it, not lit. The ground was uneven. Stones, bits of gravel, and a few puddles from an earlier rain. The mist made everything shine slightly, like the whole alley was wrapped in glass. He rubbed his hands together, then slid them into his coat sleeves. His fingers were stiff from the cold. He moved them slowly, pressing one finger into the next, just to feel the skin stretch. His gloves were folded in his coat pocket. He had taken them off earlier when checking the map. He kept them there now, saving them for when his fingers felt worse. The village was still. Occasionally footsteps echoed from far away, but they never came close. A cart passed once, pulled by a slow horse. Its wheels made a soft rolling sound. A man walked beside it, hunched and quiet, his hat pulled low. Jacob stayed in the shadows. He didn't plan to sleep again. Just wait. The sky stayed the same dull gray. It had been that way for hours. The moon was hidden behind clouds. The stars didn't show. It felt like the sky had no top, just endless layers of quiet fog. He looked at his watch. The hands moved slowly, ticking softly. 2 hours until midnight. He stood up. His legs tingled a little, waking from stillness. He stretched, turned his head side to side, letting the muscles loosen. He stepped out from the alley and walked along the wall, back toward the station. The streets were damp. The lamps along the road hummed softly. Some flickered. Their glow was warm but tired. Light spilled across the cobblestones in long shapes, reaching his boots and then pulling back with the mist. He walked slow, not too slow, just enough to look like someone finishing work, someone heading home. He passed the bakery again. The scent of burned crust hung in the air, trapped in the cracks of the door. He passed a window with lace curtains. A candle flickered inside. A woman sat by it sewing something small. Her head was bent. Her eyes didn't lift. He reached the corner near the station, stopped. The same small bench waited under the lamppost, empty. He looked around. No one. Just the sound of the wind brushing the leaves on a tree nearby. He crossed the street and leaned against a wall behind a row of barrels. One was cracked open, filled with old newspapers. He took one and opened it slowly, held it in front of him. Now he looked like someone just reading the news. But his eyes were not on the words. They watched the station. The door opened. A man stepped out. He wore a long black coat and held a walking stick. He looked left, then right, then lit a cigarette with shaking hands. Jacob didn't stare. He turned a page of the paper. The man walked away, his cane tapping the ground softly. Another person came next, a young boy with a bundle under his arm. He stood near the bench shifting from foot to foot, then walked away quickly. Jacob folded the paper and placed it back in the barrel. He moved to the side of the station, near the loading ramp. It was dark here, only the back door and a wooden fence. He checked the clock above the platform. 11:30. He waited. Minutes passed slowly, then soft at first. The whistle of the train. It came from far away, a gentle cry, long and low. Then again, Jacob stepped out of the shadow and stood near the edge of the platform. Behind a tall post, the train arrived. It was not large, only 4 cars. Its engine puffed slow steam. The front light glowed like a sleepy eye. It stopped. The brakes hissed softly. Doors opened. Jacob watched. People stepped down. 3, 4, then a 5th, then him, Daniel, the man from the photo. He looked just like the picture. Glasses, thick dark hair, same coat. He carried a small brown bag in one hand. He looked tired. His shoulders drooped. His steps were slow. Jacob stepped back into the shadow. Daniel looked around, then walked past the bench, past the lamppost, toward the bakery. Jacob followed from a distance, not too close, not too far, just enough to watch. Daniel turned down a side street. Jacob waited at the corner, then followed. The houses were dark now, most windows shut, no candles. Daniel stopped near a gate, reached into his pocket, took out a small piece of paper, checked it, then opened the gate, walked up the path, knocked. The door opened. Jacob couldn't see who opened it, just a hand, a coat sleeve. Daniel stepped in. The door closed. Jacob stood still. He waited. 5 minutes, 10. He walked past the gate. Slow and quiet. Listened. No voices, no movement. He walked on, back to the station. There he waited. Another train came an hour later. He did not board it. He watched the doors open, then close. The train left. He sat on the bench. The wood was cold. His hands were cold. He took out the photo again, looked at Daniel's face one more time, then folded it, and placed it back inside his coat. He didn't need it anymore. He had seen enough. He would return tomorrow, watch again, because the job was never done in one night, not when silence was the loudest thing. The morning sky looked like wet cloth gray, soft and heavy. Jacob stood at the edge of a small hill outside the village. The trees around him were still. No wind, no birds, just the quiet sound of mist touching the leaves. He looked down at the rooftops below. Some chimneys gave off smoke, rising slowly, vanishing into the thick sky. It was early. Not many people were out yet. He pulled his coat tighter around him. The fabric was cold from the night air. His scarf itched slightly at his neck, but he didn't move it. His boots were damp from the grass. Each step he had taken up the hill had left behind a dark mark in the morning dew. He sat on a low stone wall. It ran along the edge of the path, like a spine. The stones were smooth and rounded, covered in patches of moss. He placed his bag beside him, and let his arms rest on his knees. He reached into his coat, and pulled out a small piece of hard bread, wrapped in paper. He bit into it. It cracked, dry and plain. He chewed slowly, swallowing without much taste. He took another bite, then stopped. He folded the paper again and placed it back in the bag. The air smelled like earth and wood smoke. He could hear a dog barking faintly in the distance. A rooster called once, then silence again. He took out the envelope once more. Daniel's photo. The man from the train. The man from last night. Jacob looked at the face again. Calm, young, serious. He traced the edge of the picture with his thumb. The back of it was still blank, except for the words, Train Tuesday, midnight. That had passed. But now came the real work. Jacob slid the photo back into the envelope and folded it. He tucked it back into his coat pocket, then stood up. He walked down the hill. The grass brushed his legs. A few fallen leaves stuck to his boots. The ground felt softer here. Each step left a print. At the bottom of the hill was a narrow road. It curved into the village, past a low wooden fence, and a well with a wooden lid. He passed them both. He reached the gate. Daniel had walked through. It was quiet now. The house behind the gate looked the same. Small, white walls, dark wooden roof. No smoke from the chimney. Curtains drawn tight. Jacob did not go in. He walked past. He turned down the next street and stopped behind a cart filled with straw. He knelt beside it, tying one boot slowly. His eyes stayed on the house. He watched. No movement. He waited, then walked again. This time to the back of the road. There was a path behind the houses, narrow and full of puddles. He stepped carefully, avoiding the mud. His coat brushed against a wet hedge. Behind the house was a shed. The door was shut, but not locked. He saw footprints in the soft dirt leading to it. Small, wide. Maybe Daniel's. He didn't open the door. He listened. Nothing. He backed away and stood behind a tree. A few minutes later, the back door of the house opened. Daniel stepped out. He was holding a cup. Steam rose from it. He didn't see Jacob. He looked out across the garden, then sat on a small wooden step. He sipped the drink slowly. Jacob stayed still. He watched Daniel. The man looked calm. He was wearing the same coat from the night before. His hair was still messy. He leaned his head against the door frame, closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again. A woman came to the door. She handed him a piece of paper and said something. Daniel nodded. Then she left. He looked at the paper for a long time, folded it, slipped it into his pocket. Then stood, went back inside. Jacob waited 10 minutes, maybe 15. Then he left the path. He walked back through the narrow road, past the well, past the fence, back to the main square. A market had opened now. Stalls lined the square. People gathered slowly, carrying baskets, speaking in quiet voices. A man sold onions from a wooden crate. Another sold bread from a small cart. The smell of fresh rolls and warm apples drifted through the air. Jacob blended in. He picked up a small apple and handed over a coin. The vendor nodded. No words exchanged. He walked to a bench and sat. He ate the apple in small bites. The juice was sweet and sharp. He wiped his fingers on his scarf when he finished. He watched the people. Some faces looked nervous. Others were tired. No one laughed. He saw Daniel. He was across the square, near a stall that sold buttons and thread. He spoke to an old man with a wide hat. Jacob couldn't hear them, but he could see the way Daniel looked over his shoulder now and then. The old man handed Daniel a package wrapped in paper. Daniel placed it in his bag, then he left. Jacob waited. He counted to 30, then stood. He followed at a safe distance. Daniel turned down a side street. Then another. He entered a small building, with green shutters. Jacob stayed behind a wagon. 10 minutes later, Daniel came out. Without the package. Jacob knew what that meant. The package had been delivered. He walked back to the shed behind the house later that day. It was open now. Inside was a table, a chair, some tools, a coat hung on the wall, and on the table, a radio, small, black, old, but it worked. Jacob stepped inside, closed the door. He turned the knob slowly, listened to the clicks, the static, the faint sound of voices. He tapped a short message. 3 clicks. Pause. 2 clicks. Pause. 1 long click. Then silence. He waited. The reply came in soft, rhythmic beeps. The message was clear. Stay close. Do not engage. Watch all. He turned off the radio, folded the chair, left the shed. The evening came slowly. The air grew colder. The sky darkened again. Jacob sat under a tree near the edge of the village. He opened the book in his lap, and read the same page again and again, but his eyes weren't on the word. He was thinking about Daniel, about the paper, about the next train, because nothing ended here. It was only the mid. A new morning started slow and quiet. The sky was pale and colorless. It looked like it had been painted with a wet brush, and then forgotten. Jacob stood near the same tree where he had sat the night before. The bark was rough behind his back. Bits of moss stuck to his coat. His boots were sunk slightly into soft dirt, and his breath came out in small white clouds. He had not slept, only rested. Every time his eyes closed, they opened again. His ears stayed awake. The whole time, he heard the sounds of the village returning. Low voices, a door creaking open, a cartwheel turning. The ground was damp, and water from the leaves had dripped onto his coat during the night. He didn't brush it off. He just stood there, still, his arms folded. Across the narrow road was the same small building Daniel had entered yesterday, the one with the green shutters. It looked calm. Nothing strange. A window was open slightly. A gray curtain moved in and out with a soft wind, like it was breathing. A woman with a basket passed by. Her boots tapped on the stone path. She looked at Jacob briefly, then kept walking. No smile. Just a glance. That was normal. Most people didn't stop to look for long. And that was how Jacob preferred it. He reached into his coat and pulled out a hard, dry biscuit. He bit into it slowly. It tasted like cardboard, but it gave him something to chew. The sound of it crunching was the loudest thing around him. He checked the time. His small watch ticked quietly on his wrist. The hands pointed to just past 8. Still early. Still cold. He walked down the street, away from the tree. His boots made small, even sounds on the cobblestone road. Tap, tap, pause. Tap, tap. He moved like someone with nowhere to go and no reason to hurry. The market was smaller today. Only 5 or 6 stalls. The man who sold bread was not there. Maybe he had sold out. Maybe he had stayed home. Another man was setting up baskets, filled with dark green cabbage. A child stood beside him, yawning, holding a bunch of carrots tied with string. Jacob passed them, nodded. They didn't nod back. They didn't need to. He walked into a small side street, narrower than the other. The walls on both sides were close. Cracks ran up the bricks. A cat darted out from behind a barrel and disappeared into a gap under a fence. He kept walking. At the end of the lane was a building with a large wooden door and no window. The wood was dark, almost black, and had deep grooves in it, like someone had scratched at it for years. Above the door was a number, just the number 5. He stood near it, but not too near. He leaned against the wall across from it, beside a water pump that didn't work anymore. Its handle was rusted. A tin cup hung from a nail on the post. He listened. Nothing came from the building. No voices. No steps. No sound at all. That kind of silence was the loudest. After 10 minutes, the door opened. A man stepped out. Not Daniel. This one was older. Thin. Tall. A long gray coat. A brown scarf that looked like it had been washed too many times. His eyes were small and quick. He locked the door behind him with a heavy iron key. Jacob didn't move. The man walked past him without a glance. Turned the corner. Gone. Jacob waited another 5 minutes, then walked. Not back the way he came, but around. He circled the building. Found an alley behind it. He saw a window high up barred with iron, but the bars were loose. One of them bent slightly to the left. He took note of that. Then he left. He walked through the village again, past the same bench, past the same bakery with its warm smell, past the shop that sold cloth, where women touched fabric between their fingers like they were holding something important. He stopped near the church. It was small, stone walls, heavy door, a bell that hadn't rung in days. He entered. Inside it was quiet. The air smelled of candles and stone. The floor creaked under his steps. He sat in the last row. There were 5 people inside. A woman with a scarf over her hair. A man with hands folded tight in prayer. 2 children sitting still beside an old woman. Jacob didn't look at them. He stared ahead, at the front, where a cross hung under a soft flickering lamp. He closed his eyes. Not to pray, to think, to listen. The sounds were soft. A sigh, a cough, the shuffle of shoes, then silence. He stayed there for a long time. When he opened his eyes, the people had left. He stood, walked to the side of the church. There was a small room, with a wooden table and shelves filled with books. Dusty, unused. He placed a note between 2 books on the 3rd shelf. No one saw. He left. Outside, the sky had started to clear. Not much. Just enough for a thin line of light to show behind the clouds. He walked back to the green shuttered building. Waited. Then Daniel came out. Same coat. Same walk. Same serious face. He held nothing this time. Just his hands in his pockets. He walked toward the same small shop he had gone to yesterday. Jacob followed. Watched him speak to the same old man. No paper this time. Just a quiet talk. Then a handshake. Jacob watched the old man smile. He rarely trusted smiles. Daniel walked away again. Jacob followed once more. Daniel entered the post office. Jacob waited, counted his steps, waited 10 minutes, then entered too. He stood near the wall, watched. Daniel spoke to the woman behind the desk, gave her a letter. She weighed it, stamped it, placed it in a box. Daniel nodded, left. Jacob walked to the counter. "Do you know when that letter leaves?" he asked, pointing to the box. She looked up, shrugged. "Maybe tomorrow. Maybe today." Jacob nodded. "Thank you." Then left. He didn't need to read the letter. He just needed to know it was sent. He returned to the church. The note he had left was gone. That meant someone had picked it up. That meant someone else was watching too. Jacob stood outside the church for a while. The bell above him swayed in the breeze. It didn't ring. He took out his book, turned to the middle, wrote something. A name, a time, a place, then closed it again, slid it back into his bag. He walked through the village until he reached the edge, past the barn, past the well, past the fields that had begun to grow small green shoots again. He found a quiet place by the river, sat on a flat stone, listened to the water move, watched leaves float past. He took off his gloves, held his hands over the water, felt the chill rising, then sat very still, because sometimes the only way to hear something was to stop everything else. The sky turned pale yellow as the sun began to set behind the rooftops. The light changed slowly, like soft paint being brushed across the village. Shadows grew longer and stretched across the streets, climbing walls, sliding gitter carts, and falling gently across windows. Jacob sat on the bench, his hands folded on his lap, watching the square become quieter. The market stalls had been taken down, wooden boards stacked, empty crates carried off. A man with a brown hat swept the cobblestones with a wide broom. The sound of the bristles dragging across the stones filled the air in long, even strokes. Jacob's coat had picked up the warmth of the afternoon sun, but it was fading now. He pulled it tighter and felt the hard edges of the map and the metal cylinder pressed against his side. He reached into the coat, took out the map, and unfolded it again. The paper was thick and worn, with deep folds from being opened and closed many times. The edges curled. He ran his finger along the black line drawn from the village to the town 2 days west. The town's name was written in faded ink. Merlin. He had never been there. He traced the roads. One curved through forest. The other followed the tracks. Both led to a square, and on the edge of the square was a small X. He folded the map and placed it back inside his coat. The shadows near the station had grown darker. The windows reflected the last light of the day. A bird landed on the roof, turned once, then flew away again. Jacob stood and walked across the square. His boots made soft clicks on the stone. He passed a puddle, and the reflection of the sky looked like Gallic. He didn't step in it, just moved around it. He walked past the church again. The candle inside the doorway had burned low. The flame was small now, dancing gently. The air smelled faintly of melted wax and old wood. He walked to the edge of the village, toward a small group of buildings that sat near the trees. The houses here were older, made of stone and heavy wood. Smoke curled from chimneys, drifting low before being pulled up by the cooling air. He stopped in front of a shed with a slanted roof. It leaned slightly to the left. One window was covered with cloth. The door had a metal latch, rusted at the edges. He pulled it open slowly. The hinges squeaked but did not scream. Inside, the air was cool. It smelled like dry hay, oil and earth. A single lamp hung from a nail on the wall. He lit it with a match. The flame filled the room with a soft orange glow. Shadows gathered in the corners, still and harmless. He closed the door behind him. The shed was small but had everything he needed. A cot along the far wall, a chair, a small table, a pile of wood stacked neatly in the corner. Hooks on the walls held an empty coat and a long scarf. He sat on the chair, took off his boots. He flexed his toes, one at a time, feeling the pressure ease. He took off his coat and laid it across the cot, then opened the bag. From it, he pulled the metal cylinder. He turned it slowly in his hands. feeling its smooth shape. He unscrewed the top. Inside was a strip of paper, tightly rolled. He slid it out and unrolled it on the table. There were numbers on it. Rows and rows of numbers. No letters, just numbers. He pulled out his small notebook and turned to the back pages. There, on the inside of the cover, was a code chart. It was made of tiny boxes, each one with a letter and a number. He had memorized most of it, but he checked anyway. He began to write. One number became a letter, then another. The message was short. Arrive Friday. She wears blue, talks to Baker. He underlined the last line twice. He rolled up the paper again, placed it back inside the cylinder, screwed the lid tight, then placed it under a loose floorboard beside the table. The room was quiet. The wind outside picked up slightly, tapping at the door. He poured a little water from a jug into a metal cup and drank slowly. The water was cold with a taste of minerals and earth. He set the cup down, then leaned back in the chair. The wooden slats creaked under his weight. He watched the flame of the lamp move, its light dancing across the walls. Then he stood, stretched his arms and walked outside again. The stars were starting to appear, small and white against the darkening sky. The moon had not risen yet. The wind carried the smell of pine trees and smoke. He walked back toward the center of the village, past the closed bakery, past the silent square. He passed the fountain again. The stone was cold now. A small cat sat on its edge, licking its paw. He returned to the house with the guard. The gate was still open. He walked along the path and stood near the door. A light was on inside. He did not knock. He simply waited. After a moment, the door opened. Daniel stood there. He said nothing. Jacob stepped forward and handed him a folded piece of paper. Daniel took it, opened it, read, then nodded once. Jacob turned and walked away, back down the path, through the quiet street, toward the edge of the village. He would sleep now, not deeply, just enough, because Friday was coming, and the woman in blue would be watching the baker, and Jacob would be watching her. The wind carried the smell of bread early in the morning. It moved through the trees and across the rooftops. It slipped down chimneys and under doors. It made the windows hum gently. It brought the scent to Jacob's small shed, where he opened his eyes slowly. He didn't sit up at once. He stared at the ceiling, watching the light shift across the wooden beams. There were small holes where sunlight peeked through. Little dots of brightness moved as the wind pushed the branches outside. His body ached from the cot. It was too short and the mattress too thin, but he had slept enough to rest his mind, enough to begin again. He sat up slowly. The cold air touched his neck. He pulled the coat around his shoulders and stood. His boots were by the door. He slid them on and buckled them tight. The leather felt stiff, but warm from his last wear. He poured a little water into the cup and rinsed his mouth, then poured the rest on the floor. He didn't drink today. Not yet. He wanted his mouth dry, his eyes sharp. Hunger made him alert. He liked it that way. He stepped outside. The sky was bright, but not blue. It was the soft color of wet stone. A few clouds floated like stretched cotton. The air smelled clean, like the wind had taken all the dust away in the night. He walked toward the square. The village was waking up. The butcher dragged his heavy wooden table into place, the legs scraping across the ground. The woman who sold eggs carried 2 baskets, one on each arm. Her boots made soft thumps as she walked. She wore a brown scarf around her head and had red cheeks from the cold. Children ran past, laughing. One of them dropped a stick and bent to pick it up. Another chased a chicken, arms out like wings. A dog barked once and then lay down again. Jacob moved through the crowd. He wasn't noticed. That was good. He went to the baker's shop. The windows were warm with fog from inside. Through the glass, he saw the baker moving trays of reed from one table to another. The man had flour on his sleeves and forehead. A small bell jingled as Jacob opened the door. Warmth wrapped around him. It smelled like yeast and firewood, and something sweet. The baker looked up, nodded. Jacob pointed to a small roll. The baker placed it in a cloth bag and handed it over. Jacob paid with 2 coins. No words spoken, He stepped outside and stood beside the window, eating slowly. The bread was soft inside, with a chewy crust. It had little bits of dried fruit. He chewed each bite slowly, letting the sweetness settle. Then he waited. He leaned against the stone wall, watched. The woman came. She wore a long blue coat and black gloves. Her shoes were polished. She walked with small steps, slow and careful. Her hair was pulled back under a small hat. She carried a leather bag with a single strap. She did not look at Jacob. She did not look at anyone. She walked past the bakery and stopped near a bench, sat down, crossed her legs, opened her bag and pulled out a book. She read, but not really. Her eyes moved, but her hands stayed too still. She wasn't reading. Jacob finished his bread and dropped the cloth into a trash bin, then walked slowly toward the fountain. He passed the woman, did not look at her, but he noticed. One of her gloves had a small hole in the finger. The book she held was upside down, and her coat, though clean, had a rip near the bottom hem. Tiny things. But they spoke loudly to someone who watched closely. He sat on the edge of the fountain, listened to the water move, watched the people in the square. The bell rang from the church tower. Once, then again, 9 times. He waited. At 9:10, a man in a gray coat walked past the woman in blue. He dropped a paper from his pocket. It landed near the bench. The woman bent to pick it up, handed it back to him. He nodded, smiled, walked on. Jacob stood, walked to the corner of the square, turned, waited. The woman closed her book, stood, walked down the narrow street beside the butcher's stall. Jacob followed at a distance. The street was quiet. Only 2 others on it. A boy carrying milk, an old woman, sweeping her steps. The woman in blue stopped at the edge of the alley, looked over her shoulder, then walked into a small shop with no sign. Jacob waited 10 seconds, then followed. The shop smelled like oil and string. There were spools of thread in glass jars, buttons in wooden boxes, shelves with folded cloth. A man behind the counter wiped his hands on an apron. The woman spoke. "I need 3 meters of blue ribbon." The man nodded, took out a long roll, cut a length. She paid with a single coin, then added, "Can I use your back room for a moment?" The man nodded again, opened a small curtain. She passed through. Jacob waited, counted, 1, 2, 3. She returned after 27 seconds. Her bag was now slightly fuller. She thanked the man and left. Jacob waited 5 more seconds, then walked to the counter, said nothing. The man behind the counter smiled gently, then looked down and began folding cloth. Jacob stepped to the curtain, lifted it. The room was empty, but on the shelf, tucked behind a rolled carpet, was a small black notebook. He picked it up, opened it. There were only 4 pages, all written in pencil, numbers again, and names. 3 names. He recognized one. Daniel. He closed the book, slipped it into his coat, left the shop. Outside, the square was fuller now. More people, more noise, but his path was clear. He moved with the crowd, past the fountain, past the school, down the path to the trees. A boy rode a bicycle past him, whistling. A man pushed a wheelbarrow filled with wood. Jacob walked until the houses became fewer. The road turned to dirt. He found the shed, stepped inside, lit the lamp. The notebook he placed beside the one from before, then opened both. He compared numbers. They did not match, but the structure did. He began to write. His pen scratched softly on the paper. Symbols, arrows, lines. It took him 20 minutes. Then he placed both notebooks under the floorboard, stood, blew out the lamp, walked outside. The sun was higher now, the day warmer. Birds flew between trees. He walked back to the village, to find Daniel, and to share what he now knew. The night was quiet again, too quiet. The man known to others as Jacob sat inside a small train station office in southern France. He was not really Jacob. His real name was Paul, but nobody Heather knew that. And it had to stay that way. Jacob had been on the move for 6 hours. He had come by train from Paris, stopping twice to switch lines. His suitcase was small, just a few clothes. The rest was hidden in his coat pocket, a little radio transmitter, some rolled up notes, a passport with a different name. The room smelled like dust and old paper. There was a small table with a flickering lamp. He sat still, staring at the clock on the wall. Tick, tick, tick. Time moved slow here. He waited for a man. The man was supposed to come before midnight. He would say a simple sentence. The harvest was dry this year. That meant he was a friend, a contact. If he didn't come, Jacob would have to leave quickly. He looked outside. The moon was hiding behind clouds. No sound but the soft wind and the metal groan of the station roof. A cat moved across the platform. Jacob watched it go. He felt tired. His back hurt. His shoes were tight. He wanted to sleep, but sleep was a danger. Sleep meant you could be caught. Sleep meant your guard dropped. And in this world, dropping your guard meant death. Suddenly the door opened. A man stepped in. He looked old, with a hat pulled low and a long coat. He didn't smile, didn't blink much. Jacob stood up. The man walked close and said, "The harvest was dry this year." Jacob nodded slowly. "But the ground is still warm." He replied. They sat down. The man took out a small notebook and drew a map. He pointed to a road near Lyon, a warehouse there, full of supplies, ammunition, radios. The man explained that this was a target. The resistance wanted it gone. Jacob asked how many guards. The man said 12. Sometimes more. They changed shifts every night. Trucks came twice a week. Jacob memorized everything. He didn't take notes. Notes were dangerous. If caught, notes meant proof. So he only used his mind. When the talk ended, the man stood. He said no goodbye, just walked out into the night. Jacob waited 10 minutes. Then he left too. He walked slowly. No running. Running looked strange. He reached the end of the street and turned left. A man in a long black coat stood under a lamp post. Jacob kept walking. Another man coughed twice in a fast rhythm from the corner. Jacob didn't turn. Those were watchers. Gestapo. Maybe. Or worse. Jacob kept his face calm. He had learned to do that, even when afraid. He reached a small inn. The woman at the front desk was old and kind. She gave him a room key. Room 4. He thanked her, walked up the stairs and shut the door behind him. Inside the room he checked everything. Under the bed, behind the curtains, inside the wardrobe, even in the toilet tank. When he was sure it was safe, he locked the door. He sat down on the bed, took off his shoes and rubbed his feet. His hands shook a little, not from cold, but from holding in fear all day. He lay down but didn't sleep. His eyes stayed open. The clock on the wall ticked slowly. He listened to it. Tick, tick. In his mind he saw the warehouse. He drew it with his thoughts. Front gate, side entrance, back wall, guard post. He played it again and again like a song. He knew that tomorrow he would leave this town. He would go to the next one. Maybe by foot. Maybe by bike. It depended on the patrols. He pulled the covers up and closed his eyes. When morning came, he was already dressed. He hadn't really slept. He ate a piece of bread from his coat, dry and old. But food. Downstairs, the old woman smiled at him. He smiled back. It was a fake smile. But she didn't know. He walked outside. The air was cold. A soft mist covered the street. He walked east, toward the fields. After 2 miles he found a bike leaning against a tree. A resistance gift. He rode it for hours. Past farms, past rivers, past little towns with broken windows and sad faces. People waved sometimes. He waved back. By sunset he reached a small farmhouse. He knocked on the back door. A boy answered. Maybe 12 years old. He looked scared. Jacob said, "I need shelter." The boy called his father. The man came. Big hands, wrinkled face, strong shoulders. He looked at Jacob and said, "Come in." Inside they spoke little. The man gave him soup. Jacob ate slowly. He slept in the barn that night. The hay was soft. The roof leaked a little. But it was warm, in the dark. Jacob heard cows move and rats scratching, but it felt better than the train station. In the morning, he thanked the farmer. The man gave him bread and some water. They didn't ask his name. That was best. Jacob continued. He reached a village by noon. It had a church, 2 shops, and 1 long road. He stopped at the shop for milk. The woman inside looked at his face. She stared too long. Something was wrong. Jacob left quickly. He didn't run, but he walked fast. He turned a corner and saw two men in dark uniforms. They pointed. He turned again and ducked into a side alley. He ran now, down a narrow path, across a bridge, through a line of trees. He jumped a fence and landed in someone's garden. He didn't stop. He crossed fields, keeping low. His heart beat fast. After 10 minutes, he lay down in the grass and waited. No footsteps, no voices, just wind. He stayed still for an hour, then slowly got up and kept walking. He found an old shed and hid inside. It smelled like paint and old boots. He stayed there till night. When it was dark, he left. He followed a dirt road that curved through the hills. By midnight, he reached an empty house. No lights, broken door, quiet. He slipped inside and found a chair. He sat. Then he cried, just a little. Then he wiped his face, took out his map, and kept going. The small lamp flickered as the cold wind touched the window. The room smelled of old paper, wet boots, and gun oil. It was almost dark now, and the clock ticked slowly. Henry sat alone. He could hear his own heart beating. Just a few hours earlier, he had passed on a note, a message tucked inside a folded cigarette paper. It was gone now, in the hands of someone who could either save lives or ruin everything. He waited. Still, quiet. He didn't even light a candle. Spies don't enjoy light. It tells others where you are. Light can be deadly. Henry's hands shook. Not from fear, not really. He was just so tired that even his bones felt heavy. He hadn't slept more than a few hours in days. Each night he stayed awake, listening for boots on the stairs, the door creaking, the click of a gun. Being a spy in a war. It wasn't just hard. It was lonely, deeply lonely. You couldn't trust anyone, not the woman at the bakery, not the man fixing shoes, not even your own friend from school, because spies were everywhere, and they smiled, just like everyone else. That morning, Henry had hidden a tiny radio in a flower pot. He used it to listen for codes from London. They spoke in strange ways, like the fox crosses the river at midnight. That meant, the train full of soldiers was leaving, or the moon is blue tonight. That meant the message was too dangerous. Stop everything. He had learned to understand these words like music, but one mistake, one missed word, could mean death. For him, for others. Henry wasn't the only one. Across Europe, many spies sat in tiny dark rooms, sending secret clicks into the air. They called them Morse code, dot, dash, dot. Long sound, short sound. It felt like sending whispers through the clouds. Sometimes these whispers saved whole towns. Sometimes they warned cities to run before bombs came. But sometimes they were too late. That's what hurt the most. Henry thought about a girl named Liesel. She was also a spy. She worked in a small cafe in Berlin. She poured coffee and smiled, but under the floorboards, she kept tiny maps, little radios, messages written in lemon juice. Liesel was smart, brave too, but even she couldn't hide forever. One night, Liesel didn't show up at the meeting. Henry waited near the old fountain, where pigeons gathered, but she never came. 2 days later, someone whispered that she had been taken, that she screamed when they dragged her through the market, that she bit one of the soldiers. Henry never saw her again. He tried not to think about her, but on cold nights when the sky was quiet, her face floated back, her laugh, soft and kind, like a sister's. That's what war did to people. It took good things and made them disappear. The next morning, Henry had to carry a message to the other side of town, but bombs had fallen the night before, and the streets were full of rubble. Buildings were broken like toys, and fire still burned in the distance. He walked slowly, carrying a basket of eggs. Inside one of the eggs was a message. Real ink wouldn't work too easy to find, so he had used milk. When it dried, it looked like nothing, but with heat, the words would show. He passed soldiers. They looked at him, a boy with eggs, poor, dirty, harmless. That's how he survived, by looking like nothing, but inside he carried secrets that could change the world. Later in the safe house, Henry met with others. Spies came in all shapes. One man wore glasses and pretended to be a librarian. A woman dressed like a nurse and helped injured soldiers, while slipping notes into their bandages. A boy no older than 12 ran messages between farms, hidden in books about animals. They never talked about family, never said their real names. They just shared bread, shared stories, shared pain. They looked at each other with tired eyes. No one said much, but they all knew the cost. Henry remembered once when someone knocked the wrong way on the door. Just 3 knocks instead of 4. Everyone froze. They grabbed their bags, burned papers, hid money. It turned out to be a lost man asking for help, but for 2 minutes they were ready to run. That's what being a spy did. It made you ready to disappear. Once Henry had to sneak into a building that was full of guards. He was told to steal a list. Just a list of names. But those names, they were people who were going to be taken. Families, kids, old people. He dressed like a soldier, walked straight, held his chin up. The boots felt too big. His heart beat so fast that it hurt. But he got the list. He copied it in the bathroom. Using a pencil as small as his pinky, he gave it to another spy, and days later, he heard that those people had vanished into forests, hidden, safe. That was a good day. But there were not many good days. Henry sometimes wondered if the war would ever end, if he would ever be able to use his real name again, to walk without looking over his shoulder, to sleep in a warm bed, and not worry about bombs, lies and whispers. He wanted to read books again, real books, not code book. He wanted to drink hot tea in the morning without checking the window first. He wanted to laugh without guilt, to hug someone without fear. But those things felt far away, like a dream from another life. And yet, he kept going, because even in the dark, there were small lights. A woman who hid a child under her skirt, a farmer who gave a radio to a stranger, a soldier who let someone go. Small lights, tiny kindnesses, enough to keep hope alive. One day, someone whispered that the war was almost over, that the enemy was falling back, that the guns were growing quiet. Henry didn't believe it. He had heard too many lies. But then, one morning, the sky was still. No planes, no bombs, just birds, real birds singing again. People came out of hiding, hugged, cried, danced in the streets. Henry stood in the doorway watching. He didn't dance, didn't cry. He just stood there, feeling the quiet. He was still alive. Some weren't. Liesel wasn't, but he was. And that was enough. Many years later, Henry sat in a garden with his granddaughter. She asked, "What did you do in the war, Grandpa?" He smiled, looked at the flowers, sipped his tea. "I delivered eggs," he said. She giggled. Just eggs, because some stories are too heavy for bedtime. And some heroes, they never wear cape, they just carry baskets, with messages inside, and hearts full of courage, and silence, so much silence.